Hello, Hoovians, and welcome back to the third channel. I know, right? Back to the third channel, and I deliberately waited enough time to see if I got any more interviews, just because I like the idea of it looking like I do so many interviews, which I do, but I just like that idea. But there is more sensible other shenanigans occurring shortly, briefly on the third channel. But obviously the interviews are amazing because I am amazing, not to blow any trumpets or toot any horns. Because I haven't got any near me, so I would do if I had them near me, but I don't have any near me. But we shall crack on. We've got another wonderful, excellent interview, as I do say so myself. My guest today is best known as one of the hosts on BBC Radio Scotland. It is Len Pennie.
Hello.
So we'll start at the very beginning because Julie Andrews once said it was a good place to start, and she's not been wrong since. I've not had a conversation with her, so she might have different opinions now, but then she had a very strong opinion of it. But how did you get into the world we call poetry?
I came to it very late, actually. I found it quite inaccessible at school. It was something very much to be studied from the outside, and I really didn't think that I could or should write poetry. And then it was actually a therapist who said to me, "You need a hobby." And I had been sort of cross-stitching and trying to cross-stitch my mental illness away, and turns out not possible, certainly not for me. So I thought, right, I'm going to try something that's a lot cheaper, a lot more portable, and a lot more kind of expressive. So I wrote my first poem and I showed it to my mum, and she said, "Oh, Ken, that's lovely, but it's awfully sad, isn't it? Make it a wee bit happier." So I then tried very, very hard to continue writing and develop to be something a bit less bleak than the first one was. But it's been a wonderful journey, and as I have written more poetry, consumed more poetry, met more poets, it's reaffirmed to me that sort of poetry is as accessible as you make it because there's something out there for everyone. Any type of style, whether it's rap, lyrics, whether it's just a very poignant text that you send your mum, poetry exists in all of us and it belongs to all of us as well.
Yeah, and do you think that when reading poetry, do you reckon that helps you come up with more ideas of not just what to write, but the sort of style and different ways of making poetry more interesting?
Absolutely, and I'd say that goes for any kind of art form. The more of the sort of type you consume, the broader your cultural knowledge is. So, if you're a filmmaker, the more films you watch, the more styles you consume, you find out what you like, and more importantly, sometimes what you don't like. Because a lot of poetic movements, a lot of artistic movements come about as a sort of counter movement, a reaction to something that someone just looked at and thought, I don't like this. I
Yeah.
want to do the opposite. So I think the more media you consume, the more you can hone your taste, not only for consumption, but also for production.
And how do you reckon that we go about making poetry more accessible and not just something that you learn in school that's monotonous and boring?
I definitely think studying living poets is a great way for a number of reasons. One, you can actually get up close and personal with the person, and you can, figure out the cultural context if it's a context you live in, because at the end of the day, sometimes studying antiquated poetry, half of the battle is finding out what was going on in the world at the time, whereas if it's poetry that's living and breathing right now, you can also get a poet in to the class, which I'm a big fan of because it means you can actually engage with someone. There's a sort of thing in literary worlds called death of the author, where you're supposed to just say, "Oh, we don't know what the poet meant. We don't know. They're not here. I'm here." So if I'm in a classroom and someone asks me what I meant, I'm going to tell you exactly what I meant. And I think that helps, but also diversifying the curriculum in terms of, if a kid's into rap, that's poetry. I think, keeping it on the page, keeping it stagnant, keeping it dead, keeping it in the past, there's definitely a place in the curriculum for older styles of poetry and poetry from deceased poets. Because once you die, obviously your work doesn't cease to have value. But I think we need to add, we need to augment rather than take away or
Yeah.
replace.
Yeah, and do you reckon that helps when you have people in the schools and you have the it's not just poets but it's authors and when they visit. Do you reckon that helps not just the kids, but it helps everyone in that room to like get into that medium more and not think it's there's barriers to where you're not allowed into that world.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes, because it does happen, authors do come into schools, but unfortunately, sometimes it's a postcode lottery because a lot of schools, a lot of local authorities can't afford to have authors in. And so I think it should be something that's definitely the access needs to be widened because I don't think that access to the arts or to creativity should be limited to a certain, socioeconomic group or geographical location. And unfortunately, the same thing happens with a lot of things. Some schools will have access to better sport, some schools will have access to better, creative, some schools will have access to better Scots language education. And it's usually a combination of two things. Where you are,
Yeah,
how much money you have as a school, but also how much time and resources teachers are allowed to have. Because a lot of this, when I go into a school, a lot of the times it's because a teacher's DM'd me. And
yeah,
the onus shouldn't be on teachers themselves to reach out to authors and poets because they might not have that, avenue available to them. I think that we should definitely be more proactive about encouraging artists to come into schools and engage with Wayne's because the amount of authors and creatives I interview on the Arts Mix who there was one moment, one play they went to, one moment where they met a creative, one author they spoke to, and then that's their career, that's their passion. And I feel like we need to invest in those moments.
yeah. And I think that when you have these well-known people, these things in schools, I think you're right. It does develop over time, and it helps people to get inspired by these things, or they get shocked at certain moments and they didn't realize that person lived very near to them, that they didn't know that there was a famous person that your parents would know, but you wouldn't know that lives near you. That didn't happen to me once. We had someone in that they said, "Oh yeah, your parents will know who they are, but you won't because you probably don't watch Coronation Street." Okay, am I supposed to know whoever that is? And then you forget the name afterwards and go, well, there you go, you met someone famous. And one of the other things you do in your career that I think that it's becoming like bigger than it's growing all the time because it's more well known and more people find out about it. What's it like working at BBC Radio Scotland?
It's an absolute joy. The people that I get to speak to on a daily basis, it just blows my mind because, I didn't start off in radio. I didn't start off as an interviewer. So I have had to develop a style which is very sort of based on curiosity.
Yeah,
And I'm not afraid to ask a stupid question because I don't come from a background of having this, encyclopedic cultural knowledge. So if I'm talking to a ballet dancer and they mention a specific ballet style, I'm not afraid to just go, sorry, what's that? Because I feel like sometimes, when people are so passionate, they get so enrobed in their jargon and it's the best thing ever. And I think I really want to strike a balance with the arts mix between really, really interesting conversations, but also accessibility, because the arts can be so inaccessible. And I think that precludes people from getting involved sometimes, just as how I felt with poetry. So whenever I speak to a poet, I want to ask them about really sort of human, accessible topics, but also, accessibility for me, it might mean different things to different people. For me, accessibility means providing people with the tools
yeah,
that they can use to access the content. So it's not that I'm, making it less intelligent. It's not that I'm making it less, cultural. It's that I want to make sure that everybody can access it if they want, because, the BBC, when I listen to the radio, I hear these amazing voices and I want to make sure that my style, I'm not copying anyone, but I want to make sure that I can develop my own style that is just as, engaging for people listening at home.
And do you reckon that because people have certain ideas of what is art and what are the arts, do you reckon that having other people on and having like awards on TV like the like Sky Arts Award that was for the art itself, do you reckon that that helps broaden people's horizons of what is art? It's not just TV, it's not just film, it is a multitude of other things.
I think definitely, but also, I have had to adjust what I perceive as arts because I think sometimes people see arts and they put it up on a shelf and they think, oh, it's it's to be sipped like champagne. But the amount of community projects, grassroots arts projects, we had the Dundee Tapestry, which was a completely community made project telling the history of Dundee through, the textile arts. That is ours. Every single community project, whether it's, giving free violin and viola lessons to study the effects of adult musicianship, that's the arts. And that's what really intrigues me and excites me because every single step along the process of an artistic career is valid, whether it's as a hobbyist, as a casual enjoyer, as a consumer, or as a professional. And I'm so privileged to be able to speak to people on every step of the journey. We do a monthly episode called Upload, where, people from the artistic community who have not, they don't have a professional background. They're not operating as professionals at the minute. They might be balancing different careers. They might be balancing childcare responsibilities. They send their work to us and we, analyze them exactly the same way we would analyze a professional. And I think that's important because nobody wakes up and they're a professional. Everybody starts somewhere, and it doesn't matter when you start or where you start, that's valid.
Yeah. And do you reckon that because of not everyone can get to these venues, do you reckon that channels on TV like Sky Arts are another step forward in saying this is what is out there? If you can't make it, this is the art that you can still enjoy. And do you reckon that that's another step forward in helping to save the arts and make sure that the arts will be around for a lot longer than most people that are on the earth right now?
I mean, I think you're absolutely right. Accessibility is paramount when it comes to keeping the arts going, keeping it surviving. And I think accessibility obviously comes in different forums, but when we look at what makes it inaccessible, I think we definitely have to speak to people and understand what their needs are so we can meet them. And when it comes to things like performance, I always find that when I ask for things that make the stage more accessible to me, sometimes it can have that knock-on effect where other people might not feel as, embarrassed for asking, because asking for accessibility needs doesn't make you a burden. It just means you can level the playing field. So I asked to perform sitting down, for example, because I have really sore knees. And also I have really bad anxiety. So when I perform, my knees shake, and it's a kind of thought spiral where you're thinking, oh, if people can see me shaking, I'm getting more nervous. So I asked to perform sitting down. Now, other people might not think that's appropriate for the stage. They might think you have to stand to perform. But for me, that's what makes it accessible. But when I speak to young people and they say, I'm too nervous, I can't look at the audience, shut your eyes. Oh, I can't remember, and the thought of remembering makes me too anxious. Read it off a script.
Yeah,
I don't ever want there to be a fixable problem to preclude someone from engaging with the arts because there's absolutely no right or wrong way to do it. And whatever you need is necessary.
yeah. And one of the things you've done really recently, I think it aired, and you probably filmed it a lot longer than it did, but I think it aired last Thursday, but I could be wrong. My memory of that is slightly skew with at the moment. But what was it like filming this segment for the entertainment mix?
Oh, do you know what? It is an absolute privilege to be even breathing the same air as Peter Mackay, the Macker of Scotland. So this is the national poet of Scotland. And when we talk about making poetry accessible, Peter is absolutely the person for the job
Yeah,
because the way he speaks about poetry just makes you so passionate, so excited for poetry. He is. I'm so proud of his appointment because he just, it is an absolute privilege to speak to another poet who is as buzzing about poetry as I am. And we got to walk up Carlton Hill in Edinburgh and we got to speak about poetry. And it's very important, I think, also that we see poetry as fun
mm,
because I think we can academicize it a bit and we can leave it on the page and we can trap it in amber and can we think, we get handed a list of sort of concepts. What's the poet doing? Why is the poet doing it? Sometimes I think we forget that poetry is just so much fun.
yeah. And do you reckon that the more poetry that the is out in the world, not just on stage, but on radio and on TV and in books, do you reckon that that will help make it make more people interested in the poetry now that it can develop and you don't have to be in one thing? Do you reckon that's a useful tool?
Yeah, I think representation always, always, always increases accessibility because if you can see yourself, you know what you can be. And I'm so proud of the current cohort of poets that we have, poets like Simon Lamb writing for children, because it's like children, I know children of the future is a massive cliche, but we genuinely are nurturing and fostering the current generation of poets who will go on to be the greats, who will go on to be the bestsellers, who will go on to inspire the next generation of artists. And that's why when I judge children's writing competitions, I feel so secure in the knowledge that poetry, that the arts, that creativity is in such a secure place because they are absolutely smashing it. They are coming out with groundbreaking, avant garde, boundary pushing, taboo erasing. The kids are all right. Genuinely, the kids are all right. But that does not mean that we should stop investing in that because the only way that can continue is if we continue to make that accessible to them and make it something that is financially viable because careers in the arts so long have been this sort of reserve of people who can afford it. And I'm very passionate in the fact that, we should be subsidizing children's creativity in the sense that we should make no door shut to them when it comes to accessing their thirst for knowledge, their passion for the world. No matter what they want to do, we should make that accessible to them.
Yeah, and one of the things that you've done that I think should be on TV more, I don't know why they've kept it to radio only, but it depends on the viewing figures for the TV version. But what was it like being a guest on, and this is a lengthy title, so let's see if I get it right. The Good, the Bad, and the Unexpected. What was it like being on the TV version that should return?
Oh, it was an absolute pleasure. And you know, the thing that you don't realize about TV is that if you're filming for half an hour, that takes hours and hours and hours. I don't know how people on, soaps or who do, Doctor Who, that I don't know how they have the time because we were only filming, I think, for half an hour's worth of TV, but it took so long to get the right shot and the whole team. Do you know what? People don't realize just how many people, how many hands you get passed through when you're on TV because it's like a well-oiled machine. And I find that with radio as well. People don't realize that behind the presenter there's a producer, there's researchers, there's audio soups, sound techs, all these people making sure that what you consume is a finished professional product. And it's honestly, it's the best fun ever. I would like to do more TV, but it's also quite stressful because you've got to make sure that your face is like doing the right thing. Because I've got kind of like a doer face. So when I'm like just relaxing, people are like, are you okay? And I'm like, oh yeah, I've got to switch my face on.
Yeah. And do you reckon that it was harder to try and make sure that make sure that you were doing the right impressions of TV, but also trying to make sure that you were entertaining in the atmosphere because it seemed to be like because it's a well-known format from
Mhm.
radio, it seemed to be that it was hard to try and make sure that it worked well for TV because it was like a trial, and I think personally I think it did work well for TV, but I'm just gutted that it's now stuck to radio only, but it is a very good program.
I think also radio, radio opens a lot of avenues because people put radio on when they're cleaning the house, they put it on when they're studying. Radio can kind of seep into you. And I think because there's not that visual element, a lot more work goes into making sure it's engaging, audibly engaging. So I think radio is definitely a really good fit for me because I love being able to show up to work and not put makeup on. And I love no sort of no onus being placed on what people look like. I think radio kind of strips that back and it lets you sort of focus on what people are saying. And for me, that's a big thing because a lot of points throughout my career, how I look has been either criticized or, put on a pit. It's like a weird space, I think, particularly for women. So for me, radio allows me to just be myself authentically and not have that sort of visual element weighing on me.
Yeah, and do you reckon that podcasts and other audio mediums have helped to save the radio medium? Because I'm not saying that it was dying at any point. It's just because TV has become this bigger than what
Yeah.
it is. And do you reckon that because of the fact that podcasts have become popular and the fact that audio dramas and productions have become popular, do you reckon that that's helped to make sure that there's enough funding for radio and there's enough people that want to do radio?
I think podcasts are like I genuinely love the fact that all you need for a podcast is a mic and a dream.
Yeah,
It makes it so much more accessible, and it makes it so much more. diverse. There's a podcast for anything, no matter what you're interested in. I did a podcast for BBC Radio Scotland about medieval Scottish history. And look, I knew nothing at the start about medieval Scottish history. So it was a real learning journey. And I got to work with Susan Morrison, who is a historian, but also a comedian. So we were able to explore Scottish history together. And that ignited my love for podcasts in general, because again, it's this idea of you can't see anybody. You've stripped it back. You're listening to them. You're getting to know them. Everybody's got their own format. No, I love podcasts. I think they're wonderful. And yeah, I think they definitely do have a place in the radio world. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that with podcasts and with radio itself, because it's cheaper because there's no visual element, you can do anything. So without radio, you wouldn't have Stephen Mangan pretending he's actually on the island that the desert island discs are stranded on. You wouldn't have that on TV because that'd be too
He's
expensive.
not there.
Yeah, well, yeah, it'd be too expensive if you'd put that on TV because there'd be too many coffee machines.
That's it.
And it'd be odd it'd be like trying to make sure you wipe people's memories, which is impossible because the format of the show is basically that Stephen Mangan has just recorded his desert island disc and he got transported onto the island, and all he's got left is him, Thor Hurd, and Tony Robinson that's just eating everything. It's a ridiculous concept, but it's fantastic because it's just Stephen Mangan recording himself doing all the voices, so he's pretending to be Thor
Works.
Hurd, which is
It
just
works.
yeah,
It's all
you
these
get
different
that on TV.
formats. All
Yeah,
these different formats where people find their niche and they find what they love doing. And I just think that's wonderful.
yeah. And so one of the other things that you've done in recent years and is a fantastic piece of material in both handholdy. This is a weird analogy, but I'll go with it. Both in handholdy and in the audio. What was it like coming up with the idea for your book?
I genuinely did not want to write a book. I was so against the idea because for me, poetry lives in the performance. And I thought if I put it on the page, I'm trapping it in amber. I'm keeping it stagnant. No one's ever going to want a book of my poetry because it's all about my performance. It's all about me.
Yeah,
And then I sat down with some very convincing and professional people who said to me, look, putting it on the page will only increase accessibility and it will stop it being about you and it will let other people interpret it.
yeah,
And one of my pieces got studied in a classroom, and I got to read some of the essays that the young people wrote about my work. And I thought, no, I want this. I want to remove myself from the situation and let the poetry breathe and let people interpret it in their own way. So I wrote what had been at that point just disparate pieces that had no connection to each other. I sat down again with very professional people and we wove a kind of narrative into it. And I was very careful to not have all the bad stuff at the start and all the good stuff at the end. I didn't want it to look like healing was linear.
yeah,
So I made very sure to have the sort of ebb and flow and the chronological nature of my healing.
yeah,
But it was such a privilege and such a joy. I love writing. I love writing and I love books now. That has kind of opened up my appreciation for the poetry collection. I have hundreds of poetry collections now because when you read one poem from a poet, you don't really get a sense of the context, but when you read a collection, you can see how they framed it and where they've set it and the context. Oh, it's gorgeous. I love it.
yeah. And I know that when you listen to this or you read this, and the main thing is it's impressive because it's the amount of work that's took into it. But is it hard to try and work out which poems work in it? Because the other poetry book that I'd heard because it's incredibly not is Tim Key did a very small one. Well, the way he describes it is it's very small, but it has a through line of it of him and the cover the artist, which is played by Katie Wicks, but having a conversation within them just to have an argument that none of it's right, but he wants to see what it is. And do you reckon that it's hard to come up with how you choose which poems work on which page and at which moment you want it to have the same emotion from one page to another?
I think it's very difficult. I'm currently doing that for my second collection, and this time it's completely intentional. I set out to write a book. And the difference in the process is because with the first one, I was like, yeah, put that one in, put that one in, put them all in, give value for money. And this time I'm like, no, no, I need this one here. I need this one here. I'm a lot more intentional. And so it's taking a lot longer, but also having that deliberate, you know, ability to set up the narrative, it feels like it's a lot more clear what's happening. And I wanted it very much to be a sister collection to the first one, like a kind of companion collection, so that you don't need both. I'd like it if people bought both, but you don't need you don't need both. But it follows on from that, the ideas that I established in poems. And it's again, I keep saying it, I'm having so much fun. Like I can't believe that this is my job. It's and I think a lot of creatives, it is hard work, it is labor, it deserves fair compensation, but at the same time, I am so privileged and happy to wake up and to be able to be working on something that I'm proud of.
Yeah, and we mentioned a few times about the accessibility of it. I think that poetry books in themselves are more accessible than most other types because you can choose which one you read at what point. You could be on the train, you could read one poem, or you could be on the toilet and read it. I wouldn't recommend it because you might drop it and get it wet, but you might be on the loo reading another, and I think it makes it more accessible because you're not just going, oh, I'll read another. You can go, I'll read this because I've got enough time to read this, and I think
Mhm.
that's what makes poetry book collections a accessible and popular genre because they're easy to pick up and just choose a random page.
Absolutely. And I think it can become a bit of a choose your own adventure.
Yeah,
Because you might a lot of people do start at the beginning, read to the end. That's fine, that's valid. But a lot of people will look down the contents page and see something that catches their eye and think, oh, I want to read this one. Oh, I want to read this one. Also valid. I don't think there's a right or wrong way to approach a poetry collection because while a narrative is important, while a through line is important for a lot of people, some people they just put them in and let you choose what the narrative is. Poetry is just as much about the consumer as about the producer
yeah,
because it's filtering through your experiences and your life, and it ceases to be about me.
yeah. And do you reckon that the hardest bit of creating the poetry collection is finding where to stop? Because you might have so many ideas and you might be there for a million years and you might have like 12 to 13,000 notebooks that are filled with ideas. Do you reckon that finishing the thing is harder than starting the thing?
I am a nightmare. Like the night before we'll go to publication, I'll be like, hey, I've got three more I wrote last night. Any chance we can add these in? I'm a nightmare. Ask anybody that works with me. I am like, because I'm always thinking, as you say, there could be more, it could be better, there could be something else, I could have missed something. So knowing when to stop is definitely not a skill that I have. I very much rely on people going, no, no more,
Yeah,
because otherwise I'd keep going. And I think endings are hard
yeah,
in any aspect. Endings are hard. So what I like to do for some projects is I'll start at the end
yeah.
and then work up to it because I am terrible at knowing when to stop.
Yeah, and I know that some people like the idea of not finishing things and not finishing programs and ripping out blank pages of books so that they don't know the ending. And I think that that's what makes endings more interesting because you know that not everyone's going to want to know an ending of something because they might be they're scared, they might be disappointed. That's Game of Thrones fans were very disappointed and they think they weren't scared to tell people. But as we get to this point in the interview and people have got to know you more. What advice would you give someone that might be watching this that wants to get into or wants to start writing and reading poetry?
For reading, I would say go to a library. Go to the library. Go to the library. Ask the librarian. Because there's two things. One, wealth of knowledge and experience from a librarian. You'll never meet anybody that loves books more than a librarian. But also, you don't have to buy it. You can read 100 poetry collections sitting in the library. You can take them out, bring them back. There's no obligation. If you don't like them, you've not wasted any money. Go to a library. So those are my reading tips. And also, the library will send them to you. I know a lot of libraries set up home delivery things. So if you can't get out to the library will come to you. They also do ebooks and audiobooks. A lot of them have really, really good services in that respect. When it comes to writing, I'll say one piece of advice and I'll give one writing prompt. I will never give another because who am I to tell you how to write? Write a bad poem. Set yourself that goal. Write a bad poem. Because if you fail, I hope you fail, you've written something of value. But if you succeed, tick, you've done it. And there's not been a single person in any writing workshop, any poetry, seminar, anything that I've ever done with anybody from right nursery wains all the way through to the wonderful late stage poets that come to it later in life. There's not been a single person that I've said that to that's come back to me with anything other than an absolute gem of a poem. Because the harder you try, to write a bad poem, the more effort you're putting in, the more you're absolute, whether there was a wee lassie who she wrote a poem, ripped it up, threw it up in the air and said, "There you go, that's a bad poem." I was like, that's like Tate Modern stuff. That's like Avon. Have you any idea how much some billionaire would pay to have you do that as a performance piece? Like, there's no such thing as a bad poem to me. It's just stuff you don't like. And if you're angry at a poem, if you hate a poem so much that it makes you raging, it's succeeded. It's made you feel something. That's the point of poetry. That's what separates poetry from, just words, is the feeling that it invokes within you. So anytime anyone's given me an example of bad poetry, don't agree.
Yeah.
Historically, William McGonagall, the worst poet in Scotland, I like to start my poetry seminars with an example of his poetry and ask people if they think he succeeded. And it all rhymes, it tells a story, and they're like, oh yeah, wonderful, wonderful. I'm like, this man is considered the worst poet. So on you go. You can't be worse than that.
Yeah, and if you were to rip up a poem, it would be a nightmare because then you would have to clean it up because it'd be
It'd be awful. It'd be
yeah,
terrible.
and then you'll have to try and work out which pieces went to what just to make sure that you don't forget it. So that you always remember what you wrote. Now one of the things you've worked on, I think that it captures the style of the way that these type of programs that sort of like capture audiences, and I think it's not too long and it's short enough for it to to have the meaning that it needs. What was it like working on the culture scene short?
Oh, that was an absolute pleasure. Again, all these projects I'm so privileged to be able to be part of, but it was amazing. It was Poems and Power, right?
Yeah,
So it was right before we launched. They filmed the launch itself. I didn't even notice they were there at some points during the launch because I was just like I was in my own wee bubble in my own wee world. And then watching it back, it just holds such a special memory for me because it was such a precarious time of life. My poetry is very dark. It draws on dark experiences. I've had a lot of pain, a lot of trauma in my life. And looking back at who I was in that moment, I am so proud of her. I am so proud of the person that I was because I was pushing through some really, really dark times. And I can see that. I can see that in my face that I was just trying to get through it. And it worked so well. Poems did a lot better than anyone was expecting. And it's all down to the sort of team that I surrounded myself with. I could not have done that alone. I could not have done it without my family, my friends, my partner. Couldn't have done it without the whole teams that have been so taking such a chance on me as well. So looking back at that, that clip, I feel really, really proud of not just me, but everyone that helped me get there. I think we're all community made. So I am definitely a product of a beautiful community.
and I think it's one of those programs that it's those there's to me, and I know it's not official because I know the ins and outs of it, but it's the genre of behind the scenes of no matter if I didn't so at the time when I watched it I didn't know enough. I knew enough about poetry to
Mhm.
at the level that you're supposed to know about poetry, but I didn't know enough about the other side of the world to that. And I think that watching that and then watching other things that were in the same realm to that inspires not just me because I get inspired by anything, which is a right nightmare. You never get anything done. But it but do you reckon that that type of thing will help and it has helped inspire future people in the future because then they see the world from not just from the writing work, but they see it from what happens after you've written the poem and after you've garnered some success with your performing and you want to pursue. Do you reckon that will help people and it has helped people since it's been out?
I really hope so. You know what? I really, really hope, if nothing else, that my story, I hate calling it my story, but you know, I mean my practice, my work, the stuff that I produce, the way that I approach creativity, I hope people find that inspirational. But I also want people to be inspired by the things I'm inspired by. You know, I write to help people. I write to draw awareness and I write with a lot of charities. I get to work with people who've helped me. You know, I very much take inspiration from the people around me. So if I can be a person around someone else that they draw inspiration from, that is the best compliment ever. You know, if people can read my work and think, I can do this. Because I like to say I write poetry for people who don't like poetry because I didn't like poetry at the start and now I do. So if I can be the kind of gateway, so I say gateway drug, the gateway poem
Yeah.
that gets people into poetry, I'd love that because all I want to do is make poetry more accessible. And if I succeed in that, then I'll sleep happy at night.
And why do you reckon that language um is so important in poetry? Why do you reckon that that's an important thing that is considered that it's not just one thing, it could be multiple? Why do you reckon that it's so important?
I think language and poetry are inextricably linked because language is how we communicate authentically, and poetry is all about communication. And I think sometimes people might feel poetry is inaccessible because of the way they speak, because of how they communicate, if they've been told it's invalid. You know, in the Scots context, the Scots language context, a lot of the people I speak to would write poetry if they knew they could write in Scots because for them, English feels inauthentic, it
Yeah,
feels too formal. It feels, you know, it doesn't feel like the way they would
yeah,
communicate if they had the choice. And part of my work is just letting them know you do have the choice. You can write however you want, you know, and some of the best poems that I've read, specifically from children, because they seem to have less inhibitions.
yeah,
You know, there's been sort of Jamaican patois, there's been Creole poems, there's been, you know, I've read Scots Yiddish poems, I've read so many different poems that have within them someone's point of view. Poetry's all about your point of view. And if that's a linguistic point of view, if that represents your culture, your family, your history, your heritage, all the better, you know, because that makes it authentically you. Not that you can't express yourself in English, but if you have any kind of home language that you're afraid to bring into your work, I would say bring it, you know, bring it as much as you want because there's space for everybody.
yeah. And do you reckon that writing poetry in certain languages helps to not only show that your passion for the language, but also help in further context save language? Because there's a lot of languages that people would say are on the brink of like dying out, which technically might not be true. It depends on what numbers you expect to die out at. But do you reckon that helps a further context, not just personally, but it helps in a wider sense with communities and countries?
Absolutely. You know, the more you see a language used, the more you use it. It's like a self-perpetuating cycle. But also, a lot of the words in Scots that have survived so well have done so because of poetry. You know, Robert Burns, for better or for worse, whatever you think about him as a man, every 25th of January across the world, Scots is spoken. You know, I've had people who hate the Scots language, who just cannot stand it, who don't believe, think it's, oh, it's a dialect, it's terrible, it's awful. On the 25th of January, they're standing up, they're doing a wee Burns poem. You know,
Yeah,
hypocritical. But also, a lot of people will say, oh, I remember that word because of a poem, a song, a lullaby, because of some part of creativity that is nestled within their brain that they knew as a child, that they knew as an adult, that they've brought forward. So I think that the more we use words, the more they get used. And that's never more true than with Scots. You know, I take a pan-dialectal approach to the Scots language. So it doesn't matter if it's a word I grew up using or whether it's a word from a different part of Scotland. I love to just like a linguistic magpie. I just take as I see, and I'll use words in a poem once, and then I'll be like, I'm gonna start using that from now on. And there, the word's back. And
yeah,
then someone else hears me saying it, and then the word's back. And then we're just slowly just bringing it all back because language is fun. Language is fun, but also, I cannot stress this enough. We made it all up.
yeah,
We made the whole thing up. So if at any point you want to change it, grow it, you know, augment it, do it because what they're gonna do?
yeah, yeah. There's no language police. Uh,
No, there's not.
well, the police don't like swearing, but that's the only language they're policing, if it's directed at them. And I think that using literary works helps save languages, and you think of all the languages that are lost and that could be
Mhm.
brought back. It's like trying to bring back a woolly mammoth. Well, it's probably a lot easier than bringing back a woolly mammoth. But do you reckon that do you reckon that it will continue to help grow languages, not just bring it back to where it was, but also develop the language and make sure that it's not in its heyday, but it is what it is now? Do you reckon that the literary world is the antidote that it's needed to help grow and preserve languages?
I mean, we're seeing that now over in Ireland with kneecap and Gueva. Like, come on, the number of people who have started learning, part of their history, part of their language, part of their culture, of engaging with all this stuff because they've seen it on the telly, because they've seen it being cool.
Yeah,
I think that aspect of cool, that's how we get the kids, that's how we get the youth, we got to make it cool again. And I I'm not in any way, shape, or form saying that I'm cool, but I am trying very hard, and I think that including your natural language, including your natural way of speaking in your work is so important because I think for a long time there's been this idea of homogenization, in for export. Why will other markets in other countries care about this niche thing if it's only, part of one culture? But look, I mean, NACAP have taken that all over the world.
yeah,
And I think again, it's this idea of accessibility. Accessibility doesn't come from homogenization. It doesn't come from, making everything so people don't have to think or engage with other cultures. I think it's about giving people the tools to engage with those other cultures and to broaden their horizons. Because for a long time, with sort of Anglocentrism, specifically in the arts, people who have a Scottish accent have had to soften it, have had to change it, have had to erase their Scots, have had to get rid of their natural way of speaking to try and fit into this mold. When really the onus should be on other people to try and understand different ways of speaking and accept other ways of speaking because they're equally as valid?
yeah. And you mentioned Kneecap's popularity, and I think that the other thing that's on it, not on a as similar level, due to it's not being a very popular film that Elton John thought was a documentary, um, which I think was the hilarious thing I've ever seen. I think there's a program that I know for a fact has traveled around traveled to other countries because programs get a license. It's called The Island, and it's in both English and Scottish version of Gaelic. So it's one of those where it's a crime drama, which is popular
Uh-huh.
at the moment, but it also merges the languages to the at certain moments when they're in the area where the police might not be speaking it, and then you
Mhm.
watch them in their own homes, in their hometowns, speaking in it, and I think that helps to show that this can be used in multiple ways. This can be used in high-powered dramas, crime dramas, and it helps say, yes, this you might not have thought about this before, but now this program's been on BBC Alba and it's been on BBC Four. I think it's gonna do a sort of. It's probably want to have the same impact as Kneecap because they're also musicians, so they've got the film and music to fall back. But I think it will help to help people learn from it because they want to learn because they've seen it being used in this interesting way, and I think that that's another way of helping language grow is by using it in not just in its original form, but mixing it with English to help more people then go, oh, that looks really interesting. I'll watch that and then learn more. And do you reckon that that's the way forward? It's not just to keep it as itself, but also like develop it so that it's accessible and easy for people to see it as something that is doable and easy and learnable.
One of the first things that my Spanish teachers told me was listen to the music, watch the movies, put the telly on, get the subtitles on, immerse yourself in the language. And I think the more points of immersion that we can offer, whether it's Gaelic, whether it's Scots, whether it's Irish, anything that we can do to immerse people and to give people the opportunity to engage with the languages in a way they'd already, you're already going to be watching the telly, you're already going to be watching music, listening to music, you're already going to be listening to the radio. Why not give people the opportunity to engage with language at the same time? And then it's by osmosis, and then it's not sitting doing poring over a textbook, doing grammar tables. You can actually hear people. That's how a lot of people learn best, is through natural observation of the language and seeing it in its natural environment. And also, you can make pretty class media when it's authentic. When
Yeah,
you're able to actually use your own voice and your own language, that's when the authenticity comes out. And for me, it's an absolute privilege to be able to speak a bit of Scots on the radio, to be able to, do my Scots word of the day, to put it in my poems, because I am very keen that Scots doesn't become a genre.
yeah,
I don't ever want to go into a bookshop and see a Scots corner. I want to see, it just be a part of sci-fi. You've got Deep Wheel Arcadia. I want to see it part of, your fiction, your drama, your romance. And the great privilege of doing the job I do is that I get to consume a lot of media. And I am seeing an absolute, like, stream, an absolute gorgeous stream of authentic media which uses Scots and it uses different languages. And it's a joy to see.
and I think a good example of that, in my opinion, that because I've interviewed people that have worked on it, but I think Outlander is a even. I'm not too sure about the books because I've only seen the program, but the books may do it as well. So I could be wrong on this, but I think the program has helped for to show the world because Outlanders I think is very popular in America, and I think it's helped show the world that there is more to Scotland than just beautiful scenery and the history. It's also language, and do you reckon that that's a good thing that programs like Outlander have been able to show off Scotland in its entirety, not just because of the scenery?
My favorite TV series that uses Scots has to be Still Game. I don't know if you've
Yeah,
ever seen that one,
brilliant. It's fantastic.
but what I love about that is that it's so authentic and it's so, it is funny, but it doesn't relegate Scots to humor because I think for a lot of the history of the Scots language, it's existed in comedic spaces because if we can laugh at it, we don't have to take it seriously. But that was the first time I ever saw Scots on screen in such an authentic way, made by Scottish people for Scottish people. It wasn't trying to be anything that it wasn't for anybody that it didn't, involve. And for me, I think the more of that we can have, the more actual representation of modern Scotland and modern Scots, the more I think people will engage with the language positively. And I think that I am very excited, as I say, by the number of people who write books and use Scots unashamedly. I was reading one last night, and not all of the characters spoke Scots. It wasn't all of the time, but there was all the way through it just natural usages of Scots unashamedly. And for me, that's just the best thing that I've seen in recent times is people just thinking, yeah, I can put that word in, and if someone doesn't know what it is, they can look it up.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and I think that's what's brilliant about it is if you use it without worrying that other people might not get it, and it works. And I really like there's a really fantastic website which most learning websites should, like governmental learning websites should do more of. And I quite like how it's on the Speak Gaelic website and there's a whole dictionary, and it's the fact that you can search in a word and you get authentic readings of it. So you might read the word and not know how to pronounce it. And what makes it really good is that they've got official recordings of people
Yes.
speaking it and learning. So the one that really stands out is on the Cornish website for the Cornish language government. They've got a whole course where Cornish people or for free of charge of the people learning, but not only can you learn from Memorize, which is an official government course, you can also learn by listening to official Cornish speakers, learn it, teach you how to learn it step by step. And I think that's the way forward. It's not just reading the word; it's learning the correct way to pronounce the word to make sure that it gets the correct meaning because some word might mean other things if you pronounce them different ways. And you reckon that's the future?
Absolutely. I think we need to make sure that language learning becomes accessible. I know I keep talking about accessibility, but it is genuinely the way forward. You know, if you relegate language learning to the academic, to the grammar tables, to the, something like that, a lot of people don't have time for that. They don't have time for that. They don't have the energy for that. They don't have the resources for that. If you have to buy a 50 quid textbook just to learn the past tense of a language, you're not going to do it. And that's why I think that the more accessible we can make it, the more we can fit it into people's lives. You know, that's why I do the Scots Word of the Day. It's why I do it online. Because if you've got 30 seconds, you learn a Scots word. You can see it in context. You can engage with Scots a wee bit every day. You don't have to sit down because trust me, I did a degree in a language. By the end of it, I was scunner. I was like, I feel like my Spanish is not at the level it should be. I couldn't go to Spain and have a massive big long conversation with someone. But the more I started speaking to my Spanish pals and listening to Spanish radio, Spanish TV, the more I started watching telenovelas, all that sort of thing. For me, that was when I started to be able to understand Spanish a bit more because you meet people where they are.
Yeah,
You know, you meet people where they are. If you don't have time to sit and study Scots, that's absolutely fine. But all I'm asking is you're open to learning a new word every day, or a new word every week, or a new word every month, just as much or as little as you want to do, just as long as you're open to it.
yeah.
You know, I think a lot of learning and a lot of, when you're learning a new language, a lot of that is just about curiosity. It's about being open to the possibility of learning something new.
Yeah. And so, as we draw a close to this interview, we come down this alleyway of confusion where the minorities get lost in the alleyway because I started talking about alleyways and ginnels and canals and all sorts. What upcoming projects have you got that you're working on that you are allowed, because I know that NDAs are everywhere these days, but that you're allowed to talk about?
I have a new book that is coming out very soon, hopefully in autumn of this year. And I am so excited about it. But I keep having to email people and be like, am I allowed to talk about this? Because I am the worst for breaking things.
Yeah,
Like, because people always put the confidentiality at the end of the email. So I'll read the headline and be like, Mom, I've been nominated for this award. And I'll read to the end of the email and it'll say embargoed, do not tell anyone. And I'm like, Mom, don't tell anyone. You know, so I'm the worst.
yeah.
So I'll say it's a book. There's poems, sister collection, lot of dark and twisty poetry, but I fear that may be all I'm allowed to announce at the minute.
That happens quite a lot. You see that when people talking about Marvel or something, they're always scared there's a sniper knocking about, unless you're Tom Holland, where you get in trouble quite quickly. This happened quite a lot. So there was Nicola Coughlan was on Graham Norton to promote the Joy to the World, the Christmas special she was in for Doctor Who,
Mhm.
and because she knew nothing about Doctor Who, she wasn't panicked about spoiling anything because she didn't know what was going on, and most people panic that they're going to say something that will then get them sacked. But I mean, NDAs are everywhere these days. So it's hard to talk about anything. Well, it's easy to talk about things, but it's hard to talk about what doesn't spoil it for the future. Like Chris McCausland spoiled the first 20 minutes of his Christmas film that was going on Sky by accident because he didn't realise he spoke about the first 20 minutes of the whole film.
I
And
mean, see, whenever I talk to people who are like proper big celebrities, I have to be careful. See, when I'm just curious, I'm like, oh, what have you got coming? I was talking to Chris Chibnall the other day, about his new book, and I asked him, do you have the sequel? And then I was thinking, no, I can't ask him questions about the second one without spoiling the first one. So I had to just stop myself because I was like, I can't spoil your work.
Yeah, and that's a hard thing. Spoilers are a hard thing because you don't know what is a spoiler, and you see people saying, "Oh yeah, I'll say this because it doesn't matter because it's in the first 5 minutes," and
Yeah, but it's the first 5 minutes could be so important for you.
yeah, it's like saying, "Oh yeah, the main character's dead in the first." I didn't want to know that they're on the poster and they're dead. That's spoiling it for me. I don't need to watch that now. Now I know what happens, and that's what's interesting. So as we come towards the end of the interview, this is your opportunity to tell people where they can find you. Don't give away your home address, but online, where can people find you?
So I am at Miss Punny Penny, Punnypennie, I am on Instagram. I am on Facebook, weirdly enough. I am on, what's the other one? Blue Sky. I'm
Yeah.
Blue Sky. I'm Lenny Soros on Blue Sky. And yeah, I, I'm around. Come find me. I'm also on TikTok if you fancy. Miss Pennie again. I Any questions about Scots, always I'm available.
And where can, or what, not where, that's an obvious answer, but what time can people hear you on BBC Radio Scotland?
So I present the Arts Mix Monday to Thursday from 3:30 until 4 on BBC Radio Scotland.
And it's well worth listening to. It be on the BBC, be on BBC Sounds,
Yes.
and I think, and I don't know this for definite. I've only ever heard this briefly, but I think it is also. I think they also play BBC Radio Scotland on the BBC Scotland TV channel during the day. I could be wrong. I
I'm
could
not
be
sure. I
wrong.
hope they do. I
I
hope
could.
you're wrong.
I could be wrong. It could be my fault for listening to putting on BBC Scotland and Lulu's playing while she sees the updating news and travel, which is an odd thing, whilst waiting to watch the entertainment mix. But I could be wrong in that, but do check that out because that could be another avenue to listen slash watch the the radio. And then there's also videos online. That's the watching element. I got myself confused there. Very
No, I'm keeping track of everything. I'm the same.
And so there we have it. Another excellent, wonderful, and glorious interview, if I do say so myself. Thank you for letting me interview you.
Thank you so much. You're an excellent interviewer.
Thank you. And if you want to see more interviews by me, well, they say if one bus doesn't come, well, when one bus is missed, they all come at once. There is an analogy there somewhere, but it got away with me. Like a bus, if you miss a bus and if you have to chase after it, unless you're unable to chase after it, you just have to yell and then it won't hear you. And so there'll be more interviews by me, as always. And if you check out, or if you look at, or if you use any other word that means have a glance at, and on Thursday, then who knows what might happen. I don't know what might happen on Thursday because it's only Wednesday. And I don't know what might happen. Well, I might do, but I might be trying to be aloof. Um,
Spoilers.
yeah. Spoilers as one shall say. So there we have it. Thank you guys for watching. And remember, no, I've forgotten.